The day the Council witnessed humanity's predator instinct trigger without warning. Part 2. The Signal. The day everything changed began like every other day on Station Athara. The Council chamber hummed with the quiet business of galactic governance. Trade disputes between the Olani and the Fenworth were being reviewed. A minor border adjustment between two outer rim colonies required a vote. The lighting in the chamber was set to its standard neutral glow, designed to be comfortable for all 12 species at once, which meant it was perfectly comfortable for none of them. Danny Holt sat in his usual seat at the far end of the human delegation's curved bench. He had his datapad balanced on one knee and a cup of earth coffee in his hand, the smell of which had become so familiar to the nearby Tivari delegates that they no longer flinched at it. He was in the middle of telling a quiet joke to Chavan, the senior Tivari empath, something about a chicken crossing a road. Chavan did not understand the joke at all, but she enjoyed the little burst of happiness she felt from Danny whenever he reached the punchline, so she waited politely, her antenna tilted forward in what humans had learned to read as a smile. 2 seats behind Danny sat Lieutenant Commander Meg Sawyer, the human military liaison. She was a compact woman with short dark hair and sharp brown eyes, who rarely spoke in council sessions, but always listened carefully. Beside her was Dr. Pete Langford, the delegation's science advisor, a lanky, quiet man who spent most meetings reading research papers on his datapad and occasionally muttering to himself about quantum field irregularities. It was 10:43 station time when the distress signal cut through the chamber. The sound came without warning. A harsh burst of static ripped across every speaker in the room, followed by a voice. The voice was human, male, and shaking with barely controlled fear. "This is Communications Officer Kevin Marsh at Relay Station Orion 7. We are under attack. Repeat, we are under attack. Unknown hostile forces have breached the station hull. They came in fast. 3 ships, no warning. They are moving through the residential sections. They are..." A crash, shouting in the background. Then Kevin's voice came back, tighter now, higher. "They are taking people. They are rounding up the civilians. They are going section by section, and they are targeting... God, they are targeting the children. The residential nursery wing. They are breaking into the nursery. There are kids in there. Velarai kids, human kids, Tivari young. Please, someone, anyone. They are taking the children." The signal broke into static and died. For 3 full seconds, nobody in the council chamber moved or spoke. The silence was total, as if the station itself had stopped breathing. Then everything happened at once. Councillor Zorath rose from his seat, his crystalline body flashing with sharp amber light, the Valori signal for alarm. "Contact Orion 7 immediately. Get me a status report. Get me sensor data from the nearest relay, now." General Hakun slammed one of his 4 fists on his console. "I want identification on those ships. Species, armament, numbers. And I want to know how they got past the corridor defense grid without triggering a single alarm." The Tivari delegation had gone very still. Their antennae were pressed flat against their heads, a posture the other species had learned to associate with overwhelming emotional input. Siobhan's dark eyes were wide and unfocused, her small body trembling as she processed the wave of fear and panic that had flooded through the chamber the moment the signal played. But Siobhan was not trembling because of the fear. She was trembling because of what she felt from the humans. She had been sitting less than 2 meters from Danny Holt when the words, "They are targeting the children," came through the speakers. She had felt his emotional state change, and it was unlike anything she had experienced in 40 years of empathic service. Danny's warmth did not fade. It did not dim gradually like a fire running out of fuel. It vanished. One moment he was a bright, steady pulse of humor and affection and contentment. the warm little sun she had described in her reports. The next moment, that sun went dark, and in its place, something else rose from deep inside him. Something that had been there all along, buried so far down that she had never once detected it in 4 years of close observation. It was cold, not the cold of absence, not the empty cold of apathy or shock. It was the cold of intent, a dense, focused, razored thing that narrowed Danny Holt's entire emotional being down to a single burning point, like a beam of light compressed until it could cut through steel. Siobhan looked at him. His face had changed. The softness around his eyes was gone. The easy set of his mouth was gone. His jaw was tight, and his gaze was fixed on something far away, something past the walls of the chamber, past the station, reaching across the void toward a relay station where children were screaming. His hands, the same hands that held coffee cups and holographic pictures of his daughter, were completely still at his sides. Not clenched, not shaking. The stillness of something waiting to strike. Siobhan turned her antennae toward Meg Sawyer. The same. The lieutenant commander had risen to her feet in one smooth motion, and her emotional signature was identical to Danny's. Cold, focused, absolute. Even Pete Langford, the quiet scientist who spent his days reading about quantum fields, had undergone the same transformation. His datapad was on the floor where he had dropped it without looking. His face was blank and hard, and his eyes were moving rapidly, calculating something, running numbers in his head. It was the same in every human on the station. Siobhan could feel them all, dozens of them, scattered across different sections of Aethera. And every single one of them had undergone the same instantaneous shift, as if a switch had been thrown. As if something ancient and shared had heard a signal older than language, a signal that said, "The young are in danger." And every human body, every human mind, had responded the same way, at the same moment, without a word being spoken between them. Danny activated his communicator. He did not ask the council for permission. He did not look at Zorath or Haakon or anyone else. He spoke in a voice that was flat and quiet, and carried no warmth at all. "This is Ambassador Holt to the Steadfast. Code Obsidian. Orion 7 is under hostile assault. Children are being targeted. Scramble everything. Full combat deployment. Now." The reply came in less than 2 seconds. A woman's voice, just as flat, just as controlled. "Copy Code Obsidian. All combat units are go. Fighter wings launching. Assault transports loading. ETA to Orion 7, 14 minutes. We are coming." Danny turned to the council. Zorath had stopped mid-sentence. Haakon's 4 hands were frozen over his console. Every delegate in the chamber was staring at the human ambassador with an expression that, across all their different faces and different biologies, meant the same thing. They did not recognize the person standing in front of them. Danny looked at them with eyes that belonged to something far older than diplomacy. "Stay out of our way," he said. Then he turned and walked out of the chamber, and Meg Sawyer and Pete Langford followed him, and the doors closed behind them. And the council was left sitting in the cold silence of a room that suddenly felt much smaller and much less safe than it had 5 minutes ago. Siobhan was still trembling. A Valori delegate leaned toward her and asked gently what she had felt. She did not answer for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was very quiet and very steady and very afraid. "I have read the emotions of over 300 species in my career. I have felt rage, grief, terror, madness, and despair. I have never, in all my years, felt what I just felt from those 3 humans." She paused. "They are not angry. Anger is chaos. What they are feeling is the opposite of chaos. It is order. It is absolute, total, predatory order. Every part of them, every thought, every impulse, every instinct has aligned toward one single purpose, and that purpose is to reach those children and destroy anything that stands between them. She looked at the council with her wide, dark eyes. I do not think anything in this galaxy can stop them right now. I do not think anything should try. The day the council witnessed humanity's predator instinct trigger without warning. Part 3. The Predator Awakens. The council watched it happen in real time on the tactical display, a massive holographic projection that filled the center of the chamber with blue light and tiny moving shapes. Every delegate had access to sensor feeds from Orion 7 and from every patrol ship in the corridor. General Hakan had ordered full surveillance integration within minutes of the distress call. And now the entire council sat in their seats and watched as humanity showed them something that none of them had ever imagined possible. The Steadfast moved first. The colony ship was a large, broad-hulled vessel that the council had tracked for years. It carried families, schools, hydroponic farms, community halls, and a small medical center. It was registered in every galactic database as a Class II civilian transport with light defensive shielding and a handful of low-grade point defense turrets suitable for deflecting debris. It was, according to every official record, about as threatening as a cargo barge. The Steadfast crossed the distance to Orion 7 in 11 minutes. The Council's fastest military cruisers would have taken 20. That is not possible, said General Hakan, leaning forward in his seat. That ship does not have engines capable of that acceleration. Our scans have mapped its drive systems a dozen times. Those are civilian-grade ion drives. They cannot produce that kind of thrust. But they were producing it. The Steadfast was burning across the void at a speed that made the Dreth tactical officers exchange nervous glances. And as it moved, it began to change. Arrays that sensor logs had always identified as communication equipment rotated and locked into positions that were clearly not meant for communication. Long, angular shapes extended from what the records called auxiliary cargo bays and locked into place with heavy mechanical precision. Weapon barrels, rows of them, dozens of them, kinetic accelerators, plasma lance emitters, and something the Velari weapon scholars could not immediately identify. Sleek, dark tubes that pulsed with a faint blue light and pointed forward like the fangs of something very large and very hungry. Those are mass drivers, whispered a Velari analyst, her crystalline body flickering with pale, frightened light. Military-grade linear accelerators. They can throw a slug at a fraction of light speed. Those are warship weapons. Capital-class warship weapons. General Hakan said nothing. His 4 hands had gone still on his console. His golden eyes were fixed on the display. From the belly of the Steadfast, fighter craft launched. Not 1 or 2, but entire wings, pouring out of bays that had been perfectly disguised as storage compartments. They were fast, angular, and they flew in tight formation, with the kind of coordination that only came from years of training. Behind the fighters came the troop transports, heavy armored craft loaded with soldiers, dropping toward Orion 7 at a steep angle, and a speed that made the Dreth tactical officers physically wince. Those descent vectors are outside safe operational parameters, one Dreth officer reported, by a significant margin. If they lose even partial thrust during approach, they will hit the station hull at lethal velocity. They did not lose thrust. They landed hard and fast on the outer hull of Orion 7, and before the landing clamps had fully engaged, the doors were already opening and humans were already moving. The station's internal cameras gave the council a view of what happened next. The hostiles were Skarathi. The identification came through quickly once the council's analysts got a clear image. The Skarathi were an outer rim species, tall and lean with gray-green skin and multiple jointed limbs. They were known throughout the galaxy as slavers. They raided stations and colony ships on the edges of settled space, took captives, and sold them on the black markets of the Deep Rim. They were fast, well-armed, and experienced. They had done this many times before, and they operated with a casual efficiency that suggested they expected nothing to go wrong. There were approximately 80 Skarathi raiders on the station, spread across multiple sections. They had already secured the main corridors and herded most of the station crew into the cargo bay. A smaller group, about 15, had moved to the residential nursery wing where the children were kept. The human assault teams hit the station from 4 entry points simultaneously. The first team through the eastern airlock was led by Tina Garza. She was a woman of medium height, with her dark hair pulled back tight under her helmet, and a calm expression on her face that the Tavari empaths monitoring from Aethera described as completely empty of everything except focus. She moved through the corridor with her weapon raised, and her team behind her in a staggered formation, each one covering a different angle, each one moving with the same smooth, unhurried precision. They encountered the first group of Skarathi in a junction corridor. 4 raiders, armed with pulse rifles, guarding a sealed door, behind which the internal sensors showed 11 station crew members, 3 of them children. The fight, if it could be called a fight, lasted 4 seconds. Tina put 2 rounds into the first raider before he had finished turning around. The second raider raised his weapon, and a human named Sam Novak dropped him with a single shot to the chest from a side angle. The third and fourth raiders tried to fall back toward cover, and were cut down by precise, short bursts from 2 other members of the team. Not a single human round struck the sealed door. Not a single shot went wide. Not a single wasted movement. The council chamber was silent. The Dreth military officers watched, with their mouths slightly open. The Kalesi, the avian poets who had given up violence 10,000 years ago, had their feathered crests pressed flat against their skulls in an instinctive fear response they had not experienced in living memory. On the station, the second team breached the western maintenance tunnels and moved toward the cargo bay where the hostages were being held. This team was led by a man named Rick Malone, a broad-shouldered sergeant with a shaved head and a voice that even on the audio feed carried the kind of quiet authority that made people listen without knowing why. His team cleared 3 sections in under 2 minutes, moving through the narrow tunnels like water flowing downhill, natural and unstoppable and fast. In the nursery wing, the Skarathi had barricaded themselves inside, with 19 children of 4 different species. Velarai young, their small crystalline bodies pulsing with terrified light. Tavari larvae, curled into tight, trembling balls. 2 Dreth hatchlings, barely a year old, huddled together in a corner. And 5 human children, the oldest of whom was 8. The Skarathi leader in the nursery, a tall raider with scarred gray skin, activated his communicator and broadcast a message to the approaching human forces. Come closer, and we kill them. All of them. Back away or they die. There was a pause. Then a voice came back over the channel. It belonged to a human sniper named Kyle Beckett, and it was so calm it sounded almost bored. You have got about 30 seconds to put your weapons down and step away from those kids. That is not a negotiation. That is a countdown. The Skarathi leader laughed. He grabbed the nearest child, a small Velarai girl, and held her up toward the door. You think we are afraid of you? You are soft little creatures. You do not have the nerve to... Kyle Beckett had been lying in a ventilation shaft above the nursery for the past 3 minutes, having crawled through 200 meters of ductwork in silence, while the negotiation channel kept the Skarathi focused on the door. He fired once. The round entered through a gap in the ceiling panel and struck the Skarathi leader in the head. The raider dropped. The Velarai girl fell from his grip, and before she hit the ground, a human woman named Nora Pullman had already come through the vent opening, dropped to the floor, caught the child, and rolled to cover with the girl pressed safely against her chest. The remaining Skarathi in the nursery did not have time to react. The door blew inward, and Tina Garza's team poured through. It was over in 6 seconds. Every raider was down. Every child was alive. Across the entire station, in every section and every corridor, the result was the same. 22 minutes after the first human boots hit the station deck, there was not a single Skarathi raider left standing. 43 were dead. 37 were restrained and alive, though several of them were shaking so badly that the Tavari empaths could feel their terror from across the sector. Not one hostage of any species was harmed. General Hakun turned off his tactical display. He sat in his chair and stared at the blank space where the hologram had been. Around him, the council chamber was as quiet as a tomb. No one spoke. No one moved. The only sound was the soft, rhythmic trembling of the Tavari delegation, who were still processing the wave of cold, predatory focus that had radiated from every human involved in the assault. On the internal camera feed, one last image played before the council's frozen eyes. It was Nora Pullman, the same woman who had caught the Velarai child mid-fall, and who had, minutes before, moved through the station like something out of a nightmare. She was sitting on the nursery floor with her helmet off and her weapons set aside. The Velarai girl was in her lap, trembling and crying in soft harmonic pulses. Nora was holding her gently, rocking her back and forth, humming a slow, quiet melody that the audio sensors could barely pick up. Her hands were steady, her face was soft, her eyes were warm. The same hands, the same person, the predator and the protector, living in the same body, separated by nothing more than a choice. General Hakun finally spoke. His voice was very quiet. We have made a terrible miscalculation. The day the Council witnessed humanity's predator instinct trigger without warning. Part 4. The Aftermath and the Silence. 6 hours passed before Danny Holt came back to the Council chamber. 6 hours during which nobody on Station Athara did very much of anything except sit quietly and think about what they had just watched. The Dreth military delegation replayed the tactical recordings 11 times. General Hakun watched every minute of every replay without speaking. His officers took notes, ran calculations, compared the human assault to their own training doctrines, and grew progressively more quiet, as the numbers told them things they did not want to hear. The human response time from distress signal to boots on the station had been 14 minutes. The Dreth quick reaction standard was 40. The human casualty count among their own forces was 2 wounded, neither seriously. The projected Dreth casualty estimate for an equivalent operation against 80 entrenched hostiles was between 12 and 20% of the assault force. The humans had lost 0. The Velarai spent the 6 hours in their meditation alcove, their crystalline bodies flickering with troubled patterns of light. They were a species that prided themselves on understanding the natural order of things, on seeing the shape of a civilization and predicting where it would go. They had looked at humanity and seen a small, warm, emotionally driven species that would never be more than a footnote in galactic history. They had been wrong, and for a species that had built its entire identity on the clarity of its perception, being wrong about something this fundamental was deeply unsettling. Their empaths had been connected to the emotional field during the entire operation, and the experience had left them shaken in ways that went beyond simple discomfort. Siobhan had retreated to her quarters immediately after the assault ended and had not come out. Other Tavari reported feeling echoes of the human emotional state hours after the event, a cold, dense residue that clung to their senses like frost on glass. 2 junior empaths had to be sedated. When Danny Holt walked back through the chamber doors, every head in the room turned. Every eye, every sensor organ, every crystalline facet focused on him at once. He looked tired. He had changed from his formal diplomatic clothes into a simpler outfit, dark trousers and a plain gray shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows. There were shadows under his eyes, and a heaviness in the way he moved that had not been there before. But the warmth was back in his face. Not all the way. Not the easy, full brightness of the man who told bad jokes and showed pictures of his daughter. But it was there, like sunlight returning after a long storm, still weak, still finding its way through the clouds. Meg Sawyer walked in behind him and took her seat without a word. Pete Langford followed, his datapad recovered and tucked under his arm. His expression quiet and distant. The chamber was full. Every species had sent additional representatives. Seats that were normally empty during routine sessions were occupied. There were even observers from species that had no formal council seat. Minor civilizations from the outer sectors who had heard what happened and wanted to see what came next. The room was packed, and it was silent, and it stayed silent, as Danny walked to the center of the speaker's floor and stood there, alone, under the soft light of the chamber ceiling. Counselor Zorath spoke first. His voice was measured and careful, each word chosen with the precision of someone who understood that this moment would be remembered. Ambassador Holt, the Council has reviewed the events at Relay Station Orion 7 in their entirety. The recordings have been made available to all member species. We are grateful for the rescue of the station's crew and residents, including citizens of multiple Council species. The courage and effectiveness of your people is acknowledged and honored. He paused. The light in his crystalline body shifted from formal blue to a deeper, more cautious amber. However, the Council also has questions. Significant questions. Your vessel, the Steadfast, is registered in our databases as a civilian colony ship with light defensive systems. What we observed today was not a civilian vessel. What we observed was a fully armed warship, operating under a civilian registration. Your military personnel executed an assault operation that exceeds the capabilities of most Council armed forces. You have been concealing your true military strength from this body for years. The Council requires an explanation. Danny nodded slowly. He did not look defensive. He did not look apologetic. He looked like a man who had been expecting this conversation for a very long time, and had hoped it would never come. You are right, he said. We hid it. All of it. The weapons, the fighters, the combat training, the response protocols. Everything you saw today was built and maintained in secret, behind false hull panels and fake cargo manifests and sensor spoofing technology that we developed specifically to keep you from seeing what we really had. The chamber stirred. Murmurs rippled through the delegations. A Fenworth delegate pulsed with agitated bioluminescence. A Khaleesi observer ruffled her feathers with sharp, nervous clicks. Why? Zorath asked. The word was simple, but it carried the weight of the entire Council behind it. Danny was quiet for a moment. He looked down at his hands, then back up at the chamber full of alien faces watching him. Because we know what we are, he said. His voice was calm and steady, and carried a sadness that the Tavari felt like a cold, slow current beneath his words. We have always known. We come from a world where the oceans are full of things with teeth, where the forests hide predators that hunt in silence, where the weather alone can kill you in a dozen different ways. Everything on our planet is trying to eat everything else, and we are the species that won, not because we were the strongest or the fastest. We won because we were the most persistent, the most adaptable, and when we needed to be, the most ruthless. He paused and let that word settle into the room. We carry predator instincts in our blood that are older than our civilization, older than our languages, older than our ability to think about right and wrong. They are wired into every cell of our bodies, and they never go away. We spent 10,000 years building laws and codes and morals and kindness on top of those instincts. We taught ourselves to be gentle. We taught ourselves to share, to cooperate, to love strangers, to sit in rooms like this and talk instead of fight. And we are proud of that, We are so proud of that, because it was the hardest thing our species has ever done. His voice was thick now, and the Tivari could feel the emotions moving through him like deep water, sorrow and pride, and something ancient and heavy and tired. But the instincts are still there, under the surface, under the smiles, and the jokes, and the handshakes, and the pictures of my daughter. There is something in every single human being that is always watching, always waiting, and when something triggers it, when something threatens the people we love, especially the children, especially the ones who cannot fight back, the gentle part of us steps aside, and the other part takes over. We do not decide to let it happen. It just happens, like a reflex, like breathing, and once it starts, it does not stop until the threat is gone. He looked at Zorath directly. We hid our weapons because we did not want you to see that part of us. We wanted to come to this chamber and be the friendly species, the ones who bring food and tell jokes and ask about your families, because that is who we want to be. That is who we choose to be every single day. But today, someone forced us to be the other thing, and now you have seen it, and I cannot take that back. The silence that followed was so deep and so heavy that it seemed to press against the walls of the chamber. No one moved. The ambient hum of the station seemed to dim, as if the very machinery of Aethara was holding its breath. Siobhan had returned to the chamber at some point during Danny's speech. She sat in her seat with her antenna trembling, and her dark eyes fixed on the human ambassador. When she spoke, her voice was small and clear, and it cut through the silence like a bell. I need to tell this council something that I believe is important, she said. I have been reading Ambassador Holt's emotional state throughout his remarks, and I have been comparing it to what I felt from the human forces during the assault on Orion 7. And I need you all to understand what I found. She stood. Her small body was still trembling, but her voice was firm. What I felt from the humans during the assault was terrifying. I will not pretend otherwise. It was the most focused, the most controlled, and the most lethal emotional state I have ever encountered in any species. But I need you to understand what was driving it. It was not hatred. It was not cruelty. It was not a desire to dominate or destroy. Underneath all of that cold, precise, predatory focus, the core emotion, the engine that powered everything I witnessed today, was love. The chamber was absolutely still. Love, Siobhan repeated. A love so deep and so fierce that it remade them. It took every soft, gentle, warm thing about them and compressed it into something hard and sharp and unstoppable. They did not become monsters today. They became what they have always been underneath. Creatures who will do anything, bear any cost, cross any line, to protect the ones they love. She looked at Danny, and her antennae tilted forward in the gesture that humans had learned to read as a smile. I believe that is the most dangerous and the most beautiful thing I have ever encountered in any species. And I believe this council owes them not fear, but gratitude, and perhaps an apology for ever thinking they were small. Danny looked at her. The sadness was still in his eyes. But something else was there too. Relief, maybe, or the particular kind of gratitude that comes when someone sees the worst part of you and does not turn away. Thank you, he said quietly. And for a long time, nobody said anything else. The day the council witnessed humanity's predator instinct trigger without warning. Part 5. The New Understanding. The days after the Orion 7 incident were strange and quiet on Station Aethara. The usual rhythm of council business continued, because the galaxy did not stop for revelations no matter how large they were. Trade agreements still needed signing. Border disputes still needed mediating. Supply convoys still needed routing through contested space. But beneath the surface of all this ordinary work, something had shifted, and everyone could feel it. The first official change came 3 days after the assault, when Counselor Zorath convened a closed session of the 12 elder delegations to discuss the matter of humanity's classification. The records had listed humans as a Class 3 social species for over a decade, and that classification had shaped every policy, every interaction, and every assumption the Council had made about Earth and its people. It had to be addressed. The discussion lasted 9 hours. The Dreth argued that humans should be reclassified as a Class 1 military species, the same designation given to the Dreth themselves and to 2 other species with significant combat capabilities. General Haakon presented his analysis with his usual blunt thoroughness. Their tactical response at Orion 7 was superior to any operation I have studied in my career, including our own. Their soldiers displayed a level of individual competence and unit coordination that would take a Dreth regiment years of additional training to match. Their concealment of military assets was flawless. They fooled our sensors, our analysts, and our intelligence networks for years. They are, by any honest measure, a first-tier military power. The Kalesi disagreed. Their representative, a poet-scholar named Tessavon, argued that military classification alone was too narrow. What we witnessed was not simply a military action, she said, her feathered crest rippling with thoughtful colors. It was something deeper, a biological and emotional response that transcends training and doctrine. You cannot classify an instinct. You can only respect it. The Tavari proposed something unprecedented. Chivan, now recovered enough to attend sessions again, though she still flinched slightly whenever a human entered the room, suggested that humanity be given a new designation entirely. No existing classification fits them, she said. They are not purely a military species. They are not purely a social species. They are both, simultaneously. And the trigger between the 2 states is not strategic, but emotional. They are a species that is gentle by choice and lethal by instinct. And the switch between the 2 is activated by love. We have never encountered this before. Our systems were not designed for it. After much debate, the Council voted. Humanity's Class 3 designation was stricken from the record. In its place, a new category was created, the first new species classification in over 2,000 years. It was called Class Null, and its official definition was simple: species defying standard classification parameters. Observe with caution and respect. The vote was unanimous. The ripple effect spread outward from Station Aethera, like waves from a stone dropped in still water. The Skarathi felt it first. Within a week of the Orion 7 assault, the full tactical recordings had been distributed across every intelligence network in the sector. The footage of Tina Garza's team clearing corridors with mechanical precision. The image of Kyle Beckett's impossible shot through a ventilation dab. The audio of Rick Malone's team sweeping through the maintenance tunnels like a flood through a canyon. And most of all, the numbers. 80 Skarathi raiders, armed and experienced and entrenched, defeated in 22 minutes by a force half their size, with 0 hostage casualties. The Skarathi raiding clans held a council of their own. The details of that meeting were never made public, but the results were clear. Within 1 standard month, Skarathi raiding operations along the entire trade corridor had ceased. Within 6 months, their activity across the broader rim had dropped by more than half. Within a year, 3 of the largest slaving cartels had dissolved entirely, their members scattering to the deep rim or abandoning the trade altogether. No formal threat was ever issued by humanity. No ultimatum was delivered. No warships were deployed to enforce compliance. The recordings from Orion 7 were enough. Every slaver, pirate, and raider in the sector watched those recordings and did the same calculation in their heads. If this is what humans do when you threaten children on a minor relay station, what would they do if you attacked a colony? What would they do if you touched one of their worlds? Nobody wanted to find out. General Hakun took a different lesson from the events. 2 weeks after the incident, he submitted a formal proposal to the Dreth High Command for a joint military training exchange with human forces. The proposal was detailed and thorough, running to over 200 pages, but its cover letter was short and personal. For 10,000 years, he wrote, the Dreth have believed we understood the nature of strength. We built our civilization on it. We trained our warriors to embody it. We measured ourselves against every species we encountered and found them lacking. We were proud of this. Today, I am less proud, because I have learned that we were measuring the wrong thing. Strength is not the willingness to fight. Any creature with claws can fight. Strength is the ability to be gentle when you do not have to be, and devastating when you must be, and to know the difference between the two. The humans understand this in a way we do not. I believe they can teach us, and I believe we are humble enough to learn. The High Command approved the proposal within a day. On Station Aethera, the changes were subtler, but no less real. The human delegation continued to operate as it always had. Danny Holt still came to council sessions with his coffee and his data pad and his easy smile. He still told jokes that did not translate. He still brought Earth food to share, and the Dreth still sneezed at the chili and still asked for seconds. He still pulled out his holographic projector at every opportunity to show pictures of Chloe, who had recently lost another tooth, and was now demanding to know why the Tooth Fairy had not yet established diplomatic relations with the Velari. But the way the other species responded to him had changed. It was not fear exactly. The Tavari empaths, who monitored the emotional state of the station's population as part of their standard duties, reported that the general feeling toward the human delegation had not shifted to hostility or terror. It had shifted to something more complex. The closest word Siobhan could find for it in the common galactic language was reverence, but she said that was not quite right either. It is the feeling you have when you are standing very close to something powerful and beautiful and wild, she explained in her report. And you know that it has chosen not to harm you, and you are grateful, and you are awed, and you are just a little bit aware in the back of your mind that the choice could change. The Velari scholars, who had always prided themselves on reading the nature of species, quietly revised their internal models. Their new assessment of humanity, circulated only among their own researchers, contained a passage that would later become famous when it was eventually leaked to the broader galactic community. We looked at the humans and saw the smile and believed it was the truth. We were not wrong. The smile is true. The warmth is true. The kindness, the humor, the love of their children, the desire to connect with strangers across the void of space, all of it is true. But it is not the whole truth. Beneath the surface of every human being, there is a door that stays closed. Behind that door is something very old and very patient and very, very capable. The humans spend their entire lives keeping that door shut. They build civilizations and write laws and teach their children to be kind. And all of it, every piece of it, is in service of keeping that door closed. And they succeed. Almost always they succeed. But when someone threatens what they love, the door opens. And what comes through it is not something any species in this galaxy should ever want to face. The Steadfast was quietly refiled in the Council's ship registry. Its new entry contained no technical specifications, no armament details, no crew complement analysis. It simply read, "Vessel capabilities classified at the request of the human delegation. Audit not recommended." Nobody argued. Nobody even asked. Months passed. The galaxy moved on, as galaxies do. New crises arose and were resolved. New species petitioned for council recognition. Trade routes expanded. Alliances formed and dissolved and formed again. The ordinary business of a billion civilizations scattered across 100,000 star systems continued in its vast, slow, endless way. But in every corridor of Station Athara, in every meeting room and dining hall and observation deck, there was a quiet, persistent awareness that had not been there before. When Danny Holt walked into a room, people noticed. When he smiled, people smiled back, and they meant it. But somewhere behind their eyes there was a small, careful alertness, the kind of awareness that living things develop when they share space with something that is both deeply kind and deeply dangerous. And sometimes, late in the station's artificial night, when the corridors were empty and the lights were dimmed, and the only sound was the low hum of the life support systems, a Tavari empath, walking to her quarters, would pass by the door of the human residential section and pause. She would extend her antennae and feel just for a moment the emotional landscape behind that door, and she would find what she always found: warmth, laughter, love, the bright little spark of a child's joy, the steady glow of a family at peace. And underneath all of it, deep and quiet and patient, the other thing, always there, always watching, always ready. Not because the humans wanted it to be there, but because it was part of them, woven into their blood and their bones and their history. And they had learned, over 10,000 years of trying, that the best they could do was not to destroy it, but to build something beautiful on top of it. To choose, every single day, to be gentle, to choose kindness over instinct, to choose the smile over the snarl. And the galaxy at last understood. The humans were not gentle because they were weak. They were not kind because they lacked the capacity for violence. They were gentle and kind because they possessed that capacity in terrifying abundance, and they chose, with every breath and every heartbeat and every small act of love, to be something better. That was what made them remarkable. Not the warships hidden behind false panels. Not the soldiers who moved like shadows and struck like lightning. Not the cold, predatory focus that had frozen an entire council chamber in primal fear. It was the choice. It had always been the choice. And it was the most human thing about them. The day the council witnessed humanity's predator instinct trigger without warning. Part 1. The Gentle Ones. The Galactic Council had been watching humanity for nearly 12 standard years, and in all that time they had never once been impressed. Not truly, not in the way that mattered among the elder species who governed the known galaxy from the great domed chamber of Station Athara, a city-sized structure floating in the calm space between 3 stable stars. The Council was made up of 12 species, each one ancient, each one powerful in its own way. The Velari were tall, crystalline beings whose bodies hummed with light when they spoke. They had mastered energy manipulation before humans had learned to use fire. The Dreth were enormous, scaled reptilians with 4 arms and deep voices that rattled the floor when they grew serious. They had once been conquerors, but centuries of philosophy had turned them into something quieter. The Tivari were small, insectoid creatures with wide, dark eyes and trembling antennae. They could feel the emotions of any living being within 100 meters, and they served as the Council's empathic advisors, reading the truth behind every word spoken in the chamber. There were others too. The Olani, who breathed liquid methane and built cities inside gas giants. The Fenworth, a fungal collective that shared one mind across 1 billion bodies. The Kalesi, avian predators with razor-sharp beaks who had given up hunting 10,000 years ago and now wrote poetry instead. Each species had earned its seat through age, achievement, and the slow, patient accumulation of civilized behavior. Humanity had earned nothing yet. They were new. They were small. Their ships were clumsy by galactic standards. Their technology borrowed and adapted rather than invented. They had been part of the galactic community for barely a generation, and in that time, they had done nothing to distinguish themselves beyond a puzzling and almost annoying friendliness. Ambassador Danny Holt was the living example of this. He was a man of average height, with sandy brown hair that never seemed to sit flat, gray eyes that crinkled at the corners when he smiled, and a habit of smiling at almost everything. He had arrived at Station Athara 4 years ago with a small diplomatic team and had immediately set about making himself liked. He brought Earth food to council meetings, strange dishes called brownies, and something he called chili that made the Dreth sneeze but also request second helpings. He learned the greeting customs of every species on the station, even the Olani, which required him to wear a sealed breathing mask and bow while holding a container of frozen methane. He asked about families. He told jokes that almost never translated properly, but always ended with him laughing so warmly that others laughed along without understanding why. The Tivarai empaths adored him. Siobhan, the senior empath assigned to monitor the human delegation, had filed a report after her first month of observation that read, "The human ambassador radiates a consistent emotional warmth that is unlike anything in our records. It is not performed or calculated. It appears to be genuine. His dominant emotional states are curiosity, amusement, and a deep, persistent affection for those around him, including species he has only just met. He is, by every measure we possess, simply a kind person." Danny had a wife named Laura, who lived aboard the Steadfast, the colony ship that served as humanity's mobile home in this sector of space. He also had a daughter, a 6-year-old girl named Chloe, who had bright red hair and a gap-toothed grin that Danny showed to anyone who would look. He kept a holographic projector in his coat pocket at all times, and at the slightest invitation, he would pull it out and display images of Chloe building towers out of magnetic blocks, Chloe chasing the ship's cat down a corridor, Chloe asleep in her mother's arms, with her face pressed against Laura's neck. "She wants to be a starship captain," Danny would say, beaming. "She told me last week that her first order as captain would be to make ice cream the official fuel of the ship." I did not have the heart to correct her. The delegates would nod politely. Some found it endearing. Most found it irrelevant. The business of the galaxy was vast and complex, and the personal attachments of a minor species ambassador were not considered important. Behind the polite smiles and the shared meals, the council had already made up its mind about humanity. The official classification sat in the records of every elder species. Class 3 social species. Emotionally driven. Potential value as mediators in low-level disputes. No significant military capability. No strategic threat. Recommended approach, friendly tolerance. The Dreth Military Council had conducted its own assessment. General Hakun, a veteran of 3 border wars and the most decorated soldier in Dreth history, had reviewed the human military files with the thoroughness his species was known for. His conclusion was blunt. Their warships are slow. Their weapons are adequate but unremarkable. Their soldiers are brave but physically inferior to at least 9 council species. They pose no meaningful threat to any established power. They are, in the simplest terms, not dangerous. This assessment was accepted without debate. It fit neatly into what everyone already believed. Humans were soft creatures from a hard world who had somehow survived long enough to reach the stars. And now they were here, smiling and sharing food, and showing pictures of their children, and that was all they would ever be. Counselor Zorath, the eldest Velarai, had perhaps put it most eloquently during a private session of the elder delegates. "Humanity is a species that leads with its heart," he had said, his crystalline body pulsing with soft blue light. "This is not a criticism, it is simply an observation. They feel deeply, they bond quickly, they care with an intensity that is at times almost uncomfortable to witness. But a species that is governed by its emotions will always be limited by them. They will never be conquerors. They will never be empire builders. They will be what they are, a warm, small, gentle people who want to be liked." Every delegate in the room had agreed, and every single one of them was wrong. not wrong about the kindness or the caring or the desire to connect. Those things were all real, all genuine, all exactly as they appeared. They were wrong because they believed the warmth was all there was. They looked at the smile and saw the whole picture. They watched Danny Holt laugh and share food and gush about his daughter, and they thought they understood what a human being was. They had no idea what lived beneath the surface. None of them did. Not the empaths, not the generals, not the ancient crystalline sages who had watched civilizations rise and fall for longer than Earth had existed.